Our first teaching demo is about the parts of a plant. In this demonstration, you will hear an introduction of our class and our lesson, the objectives and standards that we used, an overview of our lesson including the warm-up, building background, and vocabulary portion, the background of the model and strategies that we used, and a connection to research and theory, with a slide of our references.
An introduction to our lesson. This lesson is for a second grade science class about the parts of a plant. Students will discuss and identify the different parts of a plant using the vocabulary to label each part. Students will discuss the different functions each part has and why they are important. This is a second grade mainstream classroom of 15 students with 3 emerging ELLs who speak Spanish and Italian in their home language.
In this lesson, we have content, language, and literacy objectives. Our content objective is students will be able to identify different parts of a plant and their functions. The language objective is students will be able to use the content vocabulary words to describe each part of a plant. The literacy objectives are students will be able to read and write the different parts of a plant. Students will be able to write a sentence on each part's function using content words and general academic vocabulary.
The standards we will be following for the purpose of our lesson are TESOL Standard 4. English language learners communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the area of science. New York State P-12 Science Learning Standards 2-LS2-1. Plan and conduct an investigation to determine if plants need sunlight and water to grow. New York State Next Generation Learning Standards Connections 2-SL5. Include digital media and/or visual displays and presentations to clarify or support ideas, thoughts, and feelings.
The lesson will begin with an assessment of their prior knowledge of previous science lessons about living and non-living things. Using objects and living things in the classroom, the teacher will name them as examples. The students will be able to give a thumbs up if the thing is a living thing or a thumbs down and if it is not a living thing. This will assess their prior knowledge and make a connection to our new lesson today.
Build background and vocabulary. To build background, students will think about the prior lesson discussing living things. Once they are again familiar, knowing the difference between living and non-living things, we will move forward to today's lesson of knowing the parts of a plant. The new content vocabulary will be introduced with a picture of a plant displayed on the board through the projector machine. The labels with the new content words of roots, stem, leaf, and flower will be displayed for the students. We will then go over the definitions to help the students understand why each part of the plant is important. To repeat the new content words and provide a fun way to remember these terms, we will play a song, the plant part song.
To continue the rest of the lesson, we will read the book Roots, Stems, Leaves, and Flowers, Let's Investigate Plant Parts by Ruth Owen. The students will be asked guiding questions while the teacher models. The students will turn and talk throughout the reading to share their thoughts while the teacher listens in on their discussion to assess their knowledge and use of vocabulary. After the reading, we will transition into individual work, where they will complete a worksheet, which you will see on the next slide. After this time for the worksheet, we will work in small groups of 3 or 4 to conduct a mini project where they will use their knowledge of plants and use soil, seeds, and water to plant their own. To sum up the lesson, students will share what we learned today.
As mentioned in our lesson plan, the students will be individually assessed using 2 worksheets. The first one, labeled Parts of a Plant, shows an image of a plant with labels. The new content words are on the sheet for the students to see: stem, roots, flowers, leaves. The students will then take the content words and put them on the appropriate line indicating which part of a plant they belong to. On the next worksheet, Part Plants and Functions, the students will look at 4 images labeled with the new content words, flower, leaf, stem, and roots. They will be asked what the primary function of each part is. Using general academic vocabulary, we would hope that each student would be able to list one complete sentence describing the function of that plant part.
Here is some background of the models and strategies that we used in this lesson. We created this lesson with the SIOP, which is the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol Model, in mind. This lesson uses content material for all developmental and proficiency skills. Throughout the lesson, we use different strategies for all types of learners. We use visuals and songs for repetition and to emphasize the vocabulary. The students are also able to make literacy connections when they read the vocabulary in a book. They will practice the learned vocabulary and skills to discuss the plant parts and their functions. This lesson, the students are using all 4 processes of actively listening throughout the lesson, speaking in discussions and answering questions, reading along with their teacher and reading their worksheets, and then writing during the individual activity. During the vocabulary portion of this lesson, students use visuals to activate prior knowledge of plants. To build background, students can think of plants in their own lives in the school community and using the visual and songs. They will apply the vocabulary they are learning in their discussions with their peers. All types of learners are thought about in this lesson. For example, auditory learners, visual learners, kinesthetic learners when we do hands-on projects and activities, and reading and writing learners. This vocabulary learned is important for future lessons. Giving clear and simple instructions and information is important for learners to interpret and move through their activities comfortably to develop their language skills. We were able to model in the reading and think alouds for students to practice. We can make connections to life around us. Some strategies we incorporate are labeling, reiterating, and clarifying to monitor student understanding. When listening in on discussions, it is important to use their language and promote higher thinking by questions that they will be able to recall, understand, and later apply.
Connection to research theory. Using the SIOP method, Echevarria explained all the content and language objectives should evolve from the lesson topic and be part of the instructional plan. Each objective is what we want the students to learn, and each needs explicit attention. The objectives should align with the content and what the students need to be successful. The authors also mention some techniques include cooperative learning, connections to student experiences, culturally responsive activities, targeted vocabulary development, slower speech, and fewer idiomatic expressions for less proficient students, use of visuals and demonstrations, and use of adapted text and supplementary materials. In this lesson, stating clear, simple instructions and information for all students to understand. Also using visuals to learn targeted vocabulary for all types of learners. In addition, we are using texts that are appropriate to their grade level. During the lesson, students will be shown models by the teacher. Echevarria writes, providing students with a model of what to say increases the likelihood that on-point discussion will occur. Think alouds and read alouds will scaffold student learning so they can practice these skills on their own. They will be able to use what they learn to make the most of their discussions. Using visuals and audio songs in the classroom benefits all types of learners. It provides different ways to access the information being learned. One article writes, visuals in the classroom can be used for receptive purposes as scaffolds that help students comprehend complex information and support student understanding. Researchers suggest visuals help students retain information and support vocabulary learning. Visuals can also be used in a productive model, providing an alternate language for students new to school or English, or who need additional support in communicating their ideas.
Some more connections to research and theory that we have found in our readings. One supports Vygotsky's methods that using vocabulary students are able to interact with meaning. For example, students' language learning is promoted through social interaction, and teachers can guide students to construct meaning and understand complex concepts. When using this model, teachers can apply it by using concepts, using methods to aid improving content knowledge while simultaneously improving academic English skills. These strategies are employed by incorporating listening, writing, speaking, and reading skills into the curriculum, which we did for this lesson. While improving English skills, students can also use these 4 processes. When listening in on students' discussions, using their discussions as a guide for the lesson is important. Asking questions to clarify, guide their thoughts, and show how they are understanding. Students can also add on to one another for full class discussions and participation. For example, one quote suggests that eliciting students' input, feedback, and questions should really be taken into consideration for students to think appropriately. To support this model when in science, one article suggests that vocabulary knowledge in science expands when students have multiple opportunities to encounter these words and be provided examples that represent the word in rich contextual settings. Since science is really content and academic vocabulary based and it can be challenging, we provide a fun yet impactful ways for students to learn vocabulary through visuals, songs, projects, worksheets, etc. Students will have opportunities to also use what they learn in everyday life and make connection to other areas.
The research for this lesson has been brought to you by the following references: implementation of the Sheltered Instructional Observation Protocol SIOP model in the Saudi classroom. The roles of photography for developing literacy across the disciplines, the reading teacher. Shifting attention back to students within the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol, TESOL quarterly. Using the SIOP model to promote the acquisition of language and science concepts with English learners, Bilingual Research Journal. Making content comprehensible for English learners, the SIOP model, as well as YouTube for our video and education.com for our worksheets.